Welcome, everyone. Good evening to the Upton Board of Selectmen meeting on January 7th, 2020. Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have a pretty brief agenda this evening. We have regular session meeting minutes to look over for December 14th and 17th. We have an invited guest tonight. The RFP committee is here to talk about design standards and the upcoming RFP. And under discussion items, we have a motion to approve various appointments to the Community Steering Committee. Also a discussion and vote on the closure of Warren Street. We have one renewal for a Class 2 application. Accept a resignation and advertise for vacant committee positions. We also have to approve a contract disclosure under Mass General Law, Chapter 268A, Section 20D. We have recognition, town manager's report, and public comment. Okay, so normally we start with meeting minutes. We're going to pass that over until the next meeting as far as the approval of the regular session meeting minutes. So we'll move on to item 3.0, which is RFP Committee Design Standards Presentation. Please come forward, gentlemen. Looks like we have David Ross and Steve Rackerton here to talk about the project you gentlemen have been working on.
So I printed some copies in case you guys haven't seen them.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have enough for everybody, there's a couple extra copies.
I should say that the whole committee has been working on.
Yeah, I just chaperone them through it. I'm not doing the work. So, Dave Ross, chairman of the RFP committee. We have 7 members on our committee, Maureen being the rep from the Selectmen's group, and we also have an alternate. So we have 8 people that have been diligently working on this. I think we were appointed over the summer in the July-August time frame. One of the first things we decided to tackle was the design standards. And for those who aren't familiar with what design standards are, I describe it as the look and feel of what we want downtown to be. So you may recall at the November town meeting we passed the zoning. That's kind of the what and the where can go downtown, the type of business and where it can go. The design standard here is we're going to talk about what we want the properties in the new Upton Center Business District, which we approved at the November town meeting, how we want those buildings to look and feel. Without design standards, it opens up the opportunity for a property owner, a developer, to build something that meets the zoning and structural code, but they could paint it pink with green polka dots on it. They could use cedar shingles, they could use metal roofing, we could put a Quonset hut downtown, all of that would be allowed. They could have their utilities very visible. You could put all the HVAC right on the roof or actually out in front of the building. So what we're trying to do here is develop the visions, what was described in the vision for what downtown was, put that into some standards, some wording, that will give direction to folks that want to develop downtown. The approach that we're taking is the RFP committee is drafting these design standards. You can see big letters there, it's still a draft. We've had one discussion with the planning board where once everybody has had their chance to have an opportunity for input, these design standards would become a planning board regulation, similar to like a subdivision regulation. And anytime a site plan review is triggered, these design standards would come into effect. And a site plan review is going to be triggered whenever there's really a change of use to the property. So any existing owner of their property, if they decide they want to put a deck on, or they'd like to paint their house, they want to change their front door out, that doesn't trigger a site plan review. You don't have to go in front of the planning board. Design standards are not triggered. So when these are put into effect, it's not going to have any change on existing property owners with their existing structure. If you owned a house in the district and you decided to tear it down and build a veterinarian clinic, then design standards would come into place. If you just sell your house to another homeowner, design standards don't come in. So I kind of want to set that broad context that although we have in here, colors where we would like a neutral palette, we try to avoid pinks, purples, bright orange. That is not going to force anybody that has to paint their house as soon as we adopt this. If your house is already a certain color, it's in essence grandfathered in, and it can stay that way. And even if you were going to paint it going forward, you could choose whatever you wanted to. It would only be if you're going to change the use, the main purpose of the property. In the near term, that is primarily going to impact the old church, the arcade building, the parking lot, this area which we're ultimately going to be doing the RFP for. However, it's important to remember these design standards are going to be adopted for the entire district, which runs from Gasco on the Milford side all the way up through what is known as the Sanborn House right after MGM Auto going towards the West Upton side. So you may say, oh, this is great downtown, we want it right across the street. But if you put a certain rule in, we have to make sure that that design rule also works in those other parts within the district. So just trying to be fair there and not think about just what's going to be here, because we will have to deal with those repercussions, for lack of a better term, in the future. The other nice thing about putting this as a planning board regulation is if something becomes out of date, or say a new building material comes in the next couple of years, the planning board holds a public hearing and they can adopt and make a change to their regulations within a rather short time frame. If we were to put this into the town bylaws or the zoning bylaws, we'd have to go to town meeting, have the discussion at town meeting, get a 2/3 vote, and sometimes that may be the better approach to take, but other times we may say, for the removal of one word or the changing of one building material, that's going to be a lot of work to get that through. So we think going through the planning board process, having that as a regulation there is the best approach to take. And the planning board's in agreement that that's the approach we should be taking. It also does allow, if there's a unique situation, that the planning board could potentially make an exception to it. If it's like a zoning bylaw, you'd either have to go to ZBA or it's like tough luck. This is what it is. We can't make an exception. And we may have put something in here that we find out in 2 years that actually isn't viable, able to do it. So we wanted to take the opportunity, the committee, to come forward as we do serve at the behest of the board, to kind of bring you up to speed on what the design standards are. The document is approximately 10 pages, but there are a number of pieces in this which are either, like page 2 is mainly the overview of the center downtown, or we have pictures and so forth in here. So although it's a lengthy document, a lot of this is either more of a picture for you to see what we're looking for, or general context, which isn't anything new. I don't expect us to walk through this line by line tonight. I'll give it to you. The plan for the RFP center of which this is included is to issue the RFP at the beginning of February, or a couple of days in February. We plan to come before the board again on February 4th, which I believe is your first meeting, to bring the RFP forward for approval at that time by the board before we issue it. We're not going to just go out and do it on our own. So there's at least another 4 weeks in there to receive feedback, whether from this board. This is posted on the RFP's committee's page on the town website, so people are free to read that and provide feedback there. But to point out some of the areas that have come up that we're looking to continue to work or modify with, on page 4, we had a section for drainage and stormwater. We're planning at this time to eliminate that section because current conservation rules will cover that. And there's no reason for us to potentially put something in which would contradict our current conservation rules, which could cause other issues going forward. We have held on certain areas where we want to be very firm. So page 5 includes the sidewalks and pathways, and we're going to require granite curbing with concrete sidewalks in the district. Again, that's existing, stays as it is. As property is developed over time, we want that change to be made, but we want consistent feel through the district. Sorry, jumping back on page 4, where it has driveways and parking, we want to encourage all driveway and parking to be behind the buildings instead of in front of buildings. We want the buildings to be located almost right up on the street with all of your parking behind that to encourage a pedestrian-friendly walking environment. We talk about the types of styles and materials on page 6. This is where you're really getting into more of the look and the finish feel. We talk about a white or neutral color palette there. We would like historic building forms to be considered. They're preferred, they're not required. We want buildings that are very lengthy to be broken up so that they don't appear to be like a 100-foot single building. To have some type of architectural design on the front or in the facade that kind of splits that up to make it look a little longer. I mean, right now it's in the middle of the top section on page 7 where we say undisturbed building facades over 40 feet in length are required to have a change in plane articulated by projecting or recessed bays, balconies, or something like that. You just think about some of the old brick mill buildings, they can be very long and contiguous, and although that may look nice in certain places, we don't think that fits downtown. We'd rather, even if it's one building, have it look like it's been a lot of smaller buildings kind of put together to give it that New England downtown small shops type of feel. For the roofing, we are allowing for or pushing for some type of peaked roof or a facade in the front. So even if you have a flat roof, we want some type of facade gable type structure in the front that doesn't make it look like it's a square box building. But and hopefully that treatment allows you then to hide behind it maybe your HVAC and your electrical and stuff. But we don't want to be able to, if you're standing here at Town Hall and I look across the street, there's a 3-story flat roof building and I can see all the HVAC units and everything sitting right there on the top. We have a section on page 7 where we talk about the windows and how we want the windows to help differentiate between commercial use and residential use. So your commercial windows tend to be horizontal, your long windows like that. And if you think in your homes, your windows are more vertical. So if we build a mixed-use building, if the first floor has a horizontal window, and then you have vertical windows on the second and third floor, it makes it easy. We've just been trained as a society over time to go, well, that's housing, and this is commercial space down there. We also want to encourage there to be a decent amount of glass in there. We went back and forth with saying, should we have a specific percentage requirement for glass? But it really depends on what type of businesses are going to be in there. It's hard to require a lot of glass if you have a therapist's office right there, because most people do not want to visit their therapist with a giant open window looking out at the sidewalk. Whereas if you had a restaurant, you may like that and you want people to see everybody that's in there, or if you have a shop that people can see. So we ultimately moved away from requiring a specific amount of glass, but we think the more glass, the better. And throughout this, we've looked to put in areas where we want certain things to be avoided or not to be included in there. So we're not going to, and the town bylaw already says you can't have neon signs that don't say something besides open on them. We have said there's certain types of siding that we don't want, so vinyl, unfinished metal, or fiberglass is currently not allowed as the primary exterior surface. We want to avoid the use of giant vinyl awnings out there. These may be a cheap and efficient way for contractors to put something out, to provide coverage or to, seal in a building, but it's not the character that we want downtown. And that's kind of where the design standards come in that if we didn't have these, somebody could put up a building where they put a big neon sign that says open, it's got a vinyl awning over a sheet metal exterior, and that's not what we're looking for. That was not the vision downtown. And then we do have on page 8, we were very specific in picking a type of street lighting. We spent probably a good 2-hour meeting just discussing lighting, and we're trying to pick a street light that has kind of that old New England feel to it, that is meets dark skies. That was a big initiative on our side, so people aren't familiar with that. You want a street light that only shines out and down, that does not shine upwards. That is confusing for wildlife. And by picking one type of lighting and being specific on that, we'll see the same lighting through the whole district. So instead of saying just have a pole lantern, well, there's 100 different types of pole lanterns. So we felt that one was specific, where we have a specific street light, specific type of sidewalk, specific type of curbing. It will provide continuity through the entire district. Now that is a style of light that I said we spent a lot of time picking it, but was picked by 7 residents of town. So, willing to hear feedback on that from any resident. But we don't want it to be, there's 8,000 residents in town, right? We have 7 people potentially picking the street light for the next 100 years in town. And then we did cover some open space and recreation areas. We're not going to have a lot of that downtown. It's new. We already have the town fields and parks down there. But if people did create communal areas, kind of what we want avoided in there. And we touched on landscaping too. In trying to, again, have people use lighting for landscaping and trees to soften surfaces and things that we all would say that's great to have, but you have to actually put it down in writing so that any partners we're working with, any developers we know, understand that. So if you read through this, you'll notice there are things where we said is required, must be. Those were things where we were fairly definitive on. There were other areas where we put is preferred or would like to see. We did have one issue where our committee used shall, thinking that was a preferred term. We learned from the planning board shall actually means required when it comes to this process. So we have to go back and look at that, because some of the things we put shall on, we were thinking are more preferred. And the planning board was like, whoa, you're requiring this. But again, we're open to hearing feedback on that, where if people said, we think we should also explore maybe brick sidewalks. And we had a conversation on that, and there were concerns about how that's treated in the winter, bricks upheaving, it becomes uneven, are people tripping and stuff like that. So that's why we moved away from brick. And are requiring just concrete, but again, willing to hear feedback on some of those things. So as it stands right now, this draft of the RFP, the design standards will be included as an appendix or one of the appendices in the RFP that goes out for across the street. And adherence to the vision and the design standards is the highest rated criteria on a successful respondent across the street, but it will not be adopted by the planning board. I don't want to speak for Gary and his group, but probably for a couple of months. we're in agreement that we'll kind of use this as a test across the street, see how that goes. The committee will be able to still enforce these by who we select. So if the respondents across the street say, we're not going to follow this, I'm putting up a Quonset hut, they're going to score 0 points in that subsection of the RFP, which will probably result in them not being the successful respondent. So a lot of work, a lot of effort has gone into this. By no means is it finished, but I would say it's 75 to 80% of the way there. So I do have some other topics along the RFP that I'd like to cover with the board, but if we want to pause here, if there's questions from the board, or if Mr. Chairman wants to take any feedback from anybody else. So.
Sure, I think that'd be a good time to, just take a minute and kind of take this in.
Yep.
Of course, it's a lot of information to read in a short period of time.
Oh, agreed.
But it looks like excellent, very, very complete work at this point. I guess my only question, one of my questions would be, do you see with the design standards, I know we've talked in the past, we've had various discussions regarding, let's just say some chain restaurants or national franchises. Do you see this being a hindrance to any of them being able to move into this particular project?
I don't think it's a hindrance, but it will provide some obstacles to them. So, and I know we discussed this, and sorry, as I flip through here, I believe there's a section in here where you are not allowed to use your signage. So hypothetically, if McDonald's wanted to move in, they cannot put the golden arches up. They could put a nice brick building up, or white shingled building, and they could put a little sign in the window or something like that. And we've seen other towns and communities which have successfully done that with some of these corporations. I mean, just look in Hopkinton, the CVS there is not their normal big white square box to CVS. They built it in with repurposing that old building there. So,
They've used
So-
almost like a wooden sign with some kind of gold paint
Yeah.
inlay into the sign.
exactly.
So-
So we feel that it prevents, it puts up, I wouldn't say a roadblock, but a speed bump in that process. We're not obviously trying to, through the design standards, force anybody not to be here. But we're trying to maintain the feel down there. And if a company wants to be here bad enough, we've seen from other communities, these corporations, whether it's a McDonald's, a CVS, a Panera, they will adjust their external appearance for that.
Okay. Yep. Maureen, do you have any questions? No. Okay. And Brett, do you have any questions?
Yeah, my questions are just, more procedural than anything. Given that these are standards, what's the enforceability of these, right? Like if they're not bylaws, they're not required to be adhered to. So if a contractor or a developer said, thanks for the input, planning board, but these aren't bylaws, so what's the enforceability, I guess, of what's in here? You mentioned the distinction between shall and must and, could or should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really a member of the planning board would be able to speak to that better than I can. So our understanding is if we put in here like must, required, or so forth, then what the planning board can do is they can withhold special permit approval unless those items are met. Or they can issue an exception or a variance for those items. However, I've been told by members of the planning board they don't like to do that because if they're going to give one person an exception, why don't they give it to everybody else? So that's why the planning board wants us to really be sure on our must and requireds. Because if we say we're good with this and unless this, or this happens, then it's not really a required. The recommendeds are, in essence, you're buying goodwill with the town on that. So if somebody comes in and says, I can't do this, okay, it's not going to hold up your process going forward.
Right.
But if you're willing to do some of those recommendeds.
Yeah, so all of this is at the discretion of the planning board.
Yes.
So any adherence to this is at the discretion of the planning board.
They'll be the
They can-
enforcing board.
Right.
Can I question? Can the planning board adopt those as regulations to make them under the site plan review process?
That's what they're planning to do.
So once it becomes a regulation, they have more teeth.
Yeah.
So they would, so even with that, so they can issue exceptions to the site as part of a site plan review, is that right?
That is my understanding. So if you think about this
They can
subdivision,
change, yes, they can change.
Right, for
things
any
when they want
individual
to.
developer or work. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's important for us to know that we're putting the responsibility for enforcing any adherence to these standards to the planning board.
now
And it's not through town meeting, it's not through this board, it's not based on what the town thinks, it's based on what folks on the planning board want to do, both in terms of enforcing what we would put in place, but also making and managing any changes that would be proposed to these standards. So I think for us to discuss and decide or determine is, do we want to have that sit within elected board? Do we want to have it sit within appointed board? Is it under the purview of the selectmen in the town, or is it under the purview of sort of elected officials? And what, if any, role do we want the townspeople or town meeting to play, right? Because if you put it into the ZBA regulations and bylaws, the town meeting controls what happens and what the exceptions are, as opposed to the planning board doing it. So just some things to consider for us to think about and discuss.
yeah, we have had some of those similar discussions, and if we were to pass this, say, in May and add it to the zoning, we currently have zoned the majority of 140 going to Milford as either general business or CNI. Anybody that drives along there's a bunch of houses after you go past Brook Street and you start heading up the hill there, all in the general business and CNI district, even though town meeting said, no, this is a commercial district. ZBA, another elected board, issued variances. So if you put this into zoning, it's maybe out of the planning board's hands, but it's now in the ZBA, they can also issue variances or changes to it, so. And there becomes a question of who really enforces this once it goes into zoning, and we've gone back and forth. Is it planning? Is it ZBA? Is it code enforcement? We don't think it's code enforcement. They're doing it, in essence, after it's already been built and permitted, which is too late in the process. We need to catch it up front, so.
We're not the first town to do this, right? So
Yeah.
I would wonder how other towns have approached it and sort of what the pros and cons are to the different options, right? There's clearly different options
For design standards?
for design standards. Yeah, where do they usually sit? What are the implications of having them sit with the planning board versus the zoning board versus bylaws
Other
versus
boards.
design standards, or other boards, or a new board, or, you know, having the building inspector? Like, how do we?
We
how do
did
assess
ask,
what the best
we
approach
asked
is?
council about this, in October, maybe? On
we
design
haven't
standards.
set, right, and-
And they recommended it not be in the zoning bylaw.
Right, because of the challenges that it takes to make a change. You have to wait every 6 months to make a change versus if it's just under the rules and regulations of the planning board, they just have to hold a public hearing and they could affect that change. To your question, we could do, so first I always tell the story that design standards in the historic district in Plymouth, for example, is held by the Historic Commission. So if you want to construct or redevelop something in the historic district, you have to go in front of the Historic Commission, and they enforce the design standards for that community. So I think every community would be different. But if we wanted to survey the region anyways, we could just ask that question to CMRPC, who really has the pulse on all the planning agencies in Central Mass. So, and I think that's an easy question to ask.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I would be curious just to see, we're not the first ones to try to do this, so
Yep.
I'd definitely be interested in understanding some of the pros and cons of the different models.
One of my concerns, which I think goes along with what you're saying, Brett, is the planning board may be on board today.
Right.
5 years from now, that can be a totally different group of individuals, and they may have something different in mind.
Yeah.
And those individuals could make a change without going in front of the voters who've adopted
Right.
this
And I
vision.
don't, and at that point, we won't have the opportunity to reach in and affect that policy, right? Like, this is our chance to determine where that responsibility sits, and if we choose to put it there and somebody at some point disagrees with it, this board won't have any option, whether it's us or anybody else, won't have the option of reaching in and making a change in the future. So
Right.
this is sort of the chance to determine where it sits. So that's the kind of pros and cons I want to make sure we're clear on. Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
I
good.
mean, you would
Sorry.
think, yeah, you would think that you'd always want the Board of Selectmen to have a certain amount of authority over projects like this, but while at the same time regarding, going before the taxpayers, making a zoning bylaw change, the problem is, as well thought out and as thorough as we may be, there may be things in this document that don't actually work in the field.
Exactly.
I have a friend that's a very good contractor, and he's got a brilliant architect that will draw things that don't actually work. So sometimes those things
Yeah,
have to be
yeah,
addressed
Exactly.
as you're rolling.
You don't
So-
necessarily have to wait 6 months to change it.
Right, so I think that's something that we need to be, cognizant of, some things of that nature, or
Exactly.
again, materials, you mentioned it earlier, materials change, so we don't know in 5 years. Even framing standards, stretch code, I think, came across our annual town meeting a few years ago, so there's different things that will change, just in building code, So those are things that, I would think it's going to have to be, some sort of a give and take there, I would say,
Yeah.
between the planning board, who really has a better understanding of this type of work, and the BOS, who really is, the eyes and ears of the taxpayer. I like to think of it that way anyways.
Agreed.
So that's going to be it's going to be a tough boundary to try to
Right,
find
that's
what's
the-
right.
Yep, yep, and once it's set,
So-
it's set, so I think this is a chance to affect that, that's why, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I agree.
Okay. Good, this is great.
So I think there's two main takeaways here. One is, if people want to look at the document, and by people I mean all residents, provide feedback, get that. And then the second takeaway is, where does it sit?
Yeah.
And I
Is
think
this
those are
available on the website? Do we want to put it on the website? so
It's
people can see?
currently under the RFP Town Center RFP page.
Yeah.
On the website, so it's kind of got to dig for it, but
Yeah.
if you go under boards and committees, Town Center RFP, it's listed right there.
Do we want to put it up as a news item and say, first draft of downtown design standards, so at least it gets some more visibility there? If you guys are okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine, and I don't know if there's a way we put like, maybe our email address there,
Yeah.
so people can send feedback to the RFP committee.
I would think if you're going to strike the drainage and stormwater, you're going to eliminate that whole section out of this. I would only recommend that that's done before we put it up on the website.
Yeah.
Just so that we don't start conversations, discrepancies,
We
arguments.
should put up the most current version, Ed, here.
Right,
Yep.
just in case that may trigger some,
It
some
will.
undue distress that we don't.
Yeah, perfect.
And just in case people see things in here and go, wow, where did like that come from, or it's very technical, the committee is not ashamed to admit that we poached materials from other design standards in other towns and stuff. So we felt like if Blackstone had put this in, they must have gone through the vetting and it made sense there, looked good to us. But if you're like, why is this 40 feet? And it's like, well, it worked in another town, so we thought
Yeah, well, that's
we would
great.
go with that. So on some of the very specific things, it may be, the reasoning may be as simple as we poached it from somebody else. So,
And 40 feet's kind of interesting, because when you mentioned that earlier, I put a little check next to that,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking, well, in West Upton, we have, Coach Road has kind of more of a jogged front to it, but something such as the Mill House
Yeah.
actually would not fall into this particular design standard. So if you were going to replicate that building across the street, you couldn't do it. So I'm just wondering, it's 40, maybe that should be 60? Maybe
Yeah,
it should be, I don't know.
we've had a lot of debate on that and saying, should we just remove it? And, but then there's nothing definitive, so, what's the right number?
Not sure
How do
we'd
you
want
phrase
a
that?
mill house downtown.
That was some of the thinking too, that, at least right now, this is downtown. People have raised, this is getting a step ahead, this is 2022 or whatnot.
Yeah.
But if this works here, do we start looking at saying, do we put this in the West Upton Center, or do we say it's all along the 140 corridor, or something like that? But for right now, it'll be just for the UCBD.
Are there any other questions on that topic? Okay.
I brought a couple more questions.
All right. Next, did you want to speak of the RFP process?
Yes, we wanted to talk a little bit about the RFP process. So to give you guys a high-level timeline, right now we're shooting to issue the RFP. They always go out on Wednesdays, so February 5th would be the date we would issue it. In front of you the evening of February 4th for final review. Hopefully at that time there's no big surprises, but we could always delay if we need to. We will be scheduling a site visit and kind of overview presentation for any developer interested parties on the week of February 20th. I did not bring the printout that had the date on it. I apologize for that. But during that week, we'll schedule it. Hopefully, we don't have 3 feet of snow. But the theory behind that will be we'll allow people to come in. I think we scheduled for 1 in the afternoon, and we'll give a little presentation on what we went through with Dodson and Flinker. This is the vision of the town. Talk about the properties next door, and then if people want to go over and take a walk and look, they can. And that'll be open to obviously the general public and any potential bidder. Trying to do that somewhat early in the process so people can understand it and so forth.
You said you think that's the 20th?
It's not the 20th, it's that week. Do you?
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. The week of February 24th, is that what you said?
No, it's the week before that, or maybe it is the 20th.
I'll look it up
Okay.
with our minutes.
It's the week of President's Week. I know it was that week, so.
That's the 20th.
President's.
The 20th.
What day of the week were you thinking?
Wednesday?
I'll look it up while Dave talks.
Kelly emailed it out last night.
Yeah.
I may be thinking of the 20th because I think we said March 20th will be the last day for people to submit questions. So we will issue the RFP and we think we've covered everything, but a potential respondent may say, oh, I have a question. And sorry if this is repetitive for people, but what happens is they will issue a question in writing, it'll go to Derek, the RFP committee will respond, and that response goes to everybody who's registered for the RFP. So you can't ask questions just to your benefit. We will share that information with everybody, but there may be something we missed. The due date for all of the responses is April 3rd. So that's a Friday. So we're looking at about 60 days from that people have to respond. In that, and there's rules about what they have to submit. It's like 10 hard copy envelopes and electronic copy and so forth. The committee, the RFP committee, will then open all of those responses on the April 6th, Monday, April 6th, our regularly scheduled meeting, where we will go through our scoring criteria. Our scoring criteria, which we're still developing, is listed in the RFP. So in theory, respondent can pretty much have an idea of how they're going to score. You score 0 through 3 on each of the 8 or 9 categories we have. So adherence to the vision, and if you really adhere to it, then you get 3 points. If you're kind of adhering to it, you get 1 point. Amount of affordable housing you create, your financial records. Obviously, we want somebody who's proven that they can deliver this type of project. We will then schedule interviews with our top 3 finalists, assuming we have 3 finalists, for late April, early May. We haven't finalized exactly how those interviews will go. Most likely it'd be a 20 to 30 minute presentation with some Q&A in front of the RP committee. All of our meetings are public, so those would be public for anybody to come in, but it just gives a chance for the developer to really present their plan and for us to ask questions. We will then make our selection by May 15th, which is a Friday. And our winning respondent, we would then forward on to the board, which I think your meeting then is the 18th. I think that's, or 19th, whatever that Tuesday is. 19th. So the plan would be for the RP committee to come forward with our successful respondent to present to the board. Obviously, the board has the authority to transfer property, which will be required for this person to move forward. So we can only make a recommendation to you as to who that respondent is, and then the board will have to negotiate any agreement there. So our job is to bring forward this successful proposal to this board. So that's the current timing as we see fit. We want to allow for 60 days because it's a fairly complex process. On some smaller RFPs or RFQs that the town does, it's 30 days, but we feel what we're looking at here and the amount of information we're requiring, 60 days is fair. And then we're going to need time to first score all of those responses we get, and say we get 5, we have to pick our top 3. So we need time to do that. And then there's going to be a little bit of a lag while we schedule those interviews, which could be 2 or 3 weeks. Then we'll have those interviews and be able to come back. So I think it's I want to say it's an aggressive time schedule, but it's not, it's by no means, although we're like, wow, it's all the way out in May. We're moving at a good speed to be able to do that. So now when we issue the RFP in a month, there are some things that we would like to include in the RFP as additional information, which I need the board's input from. And we do not need that information tonight because some of these are going to be questions for you to consider. So as you're aware, the parcels across the street are owned by the town and also by residents in town. So we will issue an RFP for this proposal, but it's only going to work as a development if the individual can acquire the town properties and the private properties. The RFP committee believes it would be advantageous for the Board of Selectmen to consider pursuing a transferable P&S with the current private owners to lock in a definitive price for those 3 privately owned parcels across the street. So the thinking we have is that the board would enter into a P&S with those property owners with the understanding that we will convey that P&S or transfer that P&S to the successful respondent, who will pay the property owner that agreed upon price. What it does is it removes a whole layer of uncertainty with any respondent as to, well, I'm going to have to negotiate that price. I don't know what it's going to be, what the ownership is. We've had an initial discussion with the property owners, and they are open to this idea. Obviously, I cannot negotiate that or enter into that agreement. So we would like to ask the board to consider moving forward with exploring that as a potential. There's limited cost and exposure to the town. We put down a deposit on the property. We're talking probably in the hundreds of dollars, not, we're not going to put down 500,000 on that. And then there'd be some small legal fees. And we would put a date of, say, June 1st for the actual transfer. If we're unable to successfully complete this process, June 1st comes and goes, the property owner would still own their property. We would walk away from it. So we're not putting the town on the hook for whatever it would be to acquire that property, but it removes a whole piece of doubt from that. And we've also talked with town council, and then this is all an approved or acceptable approach to do that. So that would be something that we would like to ask the board to consider. So, and like I said, we don't need an answer this evening for that. I don't know what your process is for discussing that. One of the other things that we think may be helpful is to put down, if the board has a minimum, won't go lower price for the church in the parking lot. We do think that some of the respondents may say the only way we can do this is if the town just transfers us those properties. We understand that the town has spent between the 2 of those properties a couple $100,000. So if the board feels there has to be some level of return on those properties up front, I think it would be good to know that so that we can tell respondents, if you're not going to bid at least $50,000, to 100,000, whatever that floor may be, kind of don't waste your time on filling this out either way. The RFP committee, obviously, we're sitting over here without having to answer to the voters as you do. Our approach on that is we would like to see there be no minimum set for it, and rather see what people propose and what they come forward. We would not write in the RFP, hey, we're giving this away for free. We think if a respondent feels really strong about their bid, they will make an offer. But instead of potentially putting up what could be viewed as a roadblock or an obstacle up front, we would prefer just not to mention that. But what I don't want to do is go through this whole process, bring a successful respondent forward who says, I can do this wonderful project for you, I just need you to transfer me the properties, and if this board isn't going to be able to do that, then, we've used a lot of people's time for nothing here. So if this board feels that that's important, we'd like to know what that number is ahead of time. And again, so the committee's position is not to have one, but I don't want that to come back and bite us later on that. Let me just explain why the committee feels that way. What we're looking at for a development there, we expect we'll be paying tens of thousands of dollars in annual taxes. Getting back, say, 50 grand is nice. You can go back and say we did that. But if we're potentially losing out on a productive development, which is going to pay for the next 50 years, that is a short-term gain at a potential loss over the long term. We've seen projections anywhere from 40,000 in tax revenue up to over 100,000 for whatever may be developed over there. So I'm not going to say we're risking all kinds of funds there, but trying to take that long-term view on that. But this board, I understand, has 8,000 bosses that they have to answer to. So those were two things that we wanted to cover, and let me just one other area that we've tossed around just to put out there. We're not sure what potentially the best way to move forward with it is. Do we want to consider, and I don't think this has to be in the RFP, but as we go forward, do we want to hold those town parcels until the developer meets certain steps in the permitting process? The biggest fear of the RFP committee is we pick a successful respondent, they acquire the privately owned parcels, they acquire the town-owned parcels. In 3 years from now, we're looking at what's still sitting over there. Because they've acquired everything, but they've moved on, they're busy doing other projects, or they ran out of financing or something like that. And there's nothing we can do at that point. We could look at taking them in tax title, but that's only if they're not paying their taxes, and the taxes on those properties are minimal for them to maintain that. So is there something we can do to help encourage development and momentum to continue on the project? So one of those theories was, do you potentially hold the town parcels until they've gotten so far through the permitting process on that? We are going to be asking in the RFP responses to see their development plan, and it is going to be part of how they're scored. So if they come in with a very thought out, well-structured development plan, well-structured financing, that we know that this isn't a real stretch for them and they could be breaking ground in 12 months, then that they're going to score higher on that.
If I can just stop you right there for a minute, because there's a few kind of open-ended questions that have kind of been thrown out there, and maybe we can, before you go any further, kind of answer some of those, or certainly ask some questions as we go forward. Yes.
And I know you're aware of this. Anything about the real estate transaction or price or contract, we'll do an executive session, right? That's not for open public discussion.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Right, but I think that the way I understand it, the RFP process, they may not be able to see what the monetary offer is to the town. I think when Derek explained this a few months ago, and it was, you may score, let's just, let me take your idea and go one step further
I
with
just,
it.
I don't want to cut you off, but just because when we spoke to, so that is what you're going to, I'll have to explain, there's two envelopes. One has the technical proposal, one has the price proposal. The change in this is that when we spoke to the attorney, he suggested that we require them to put up some type of price proposal up front, and that becomes part of the criteria for scoring.
So we will see the proposal in our scoring.
Okay.
I don't want you to go through all that, just to let you know what Katie said.
Because I was going to say, those are certain things that, again, let's just use your example. For instance, you may say, a developer may say, yes, I can do this project, but I need you to convey the properties at no cost. But they could go, one step further. They could ask for more, and we don't know what exactly, what kind of offer is going to come forward. But I think getting back to, I guess, backing up even a little bit further than that, I guess a question that I have regarding the proposal is, and I know that there's design standards in there, are there any standards as far as how many square footage that we're looking to have constructed on those parcels? Maybe a breakdown between commercial and residential? What else is in there that would, really steer the project?
Yeah, so right now, there are no requirements on square footage or on the mix between residential and commercial. The zoning requires that all new developments are mixed use. So we cannot receive, I'm just going to build a row of townhouses there. That's just not allowed under the zoning. But the only thing that we're giving benefit for is if they provide affordable housing. So right now the scoring says it is very advantageous, I believe that's the language used. You get 3 points if 30% of the housing is affordable. It's advantageous if it's 2 points for 20%, 1 point for 10%, and if you provide no affordable housing, you get a 0 in that category. And that goes to what was in the vision, where one of the 8 or 9 bullets on there was to see more diverse housing downtown. But we do not have any requirements on the number of housing units, the size of the housing units, if they're 1-bedroom apartments or 3-bedroom condos, nothing like that. Part of that is because we want to give them a blank slate. We may think renovating the church and a new restaurant is a great idea, but until we have these professionals come in and say, this is what we can do here, we don't want to box them in.
Right. I mean, I think from my position, the only thing that I see is, I think the emphasis really needs to be on commercial investment in the town. So I just, if a project comes forward and it has, 2 retail spaces and 22 condos, I would have no interest at all in a project like that. So I think that, we're trying to really add to our commercial base as much as anything else. So I understand the need, of course, for affordable housing is certainly a component to that. But overall, what would, I think those are the variables that, I think with the RFP is what we're going to try to steer, in my opinion, anyways. In a perfect world, of course, maybe we would like to see, and again, this number I'm sure is different for every member of the board, but you'd like to see, X number of storefronts and X number of apartments. That's going to vary between the 3 of us, but I think it's safe to say that we'd like to see, a substantial increase in our commercial base. So that's the only thing, thoughts from you, Maureen, and you, Brett. What are your thoughts on?
I think we want to.
Again, I'm only thinking that I would hate to see us go through all this process and get basically an apartment building across the street. I think that this would be fruitless if that were the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think my recommendation is to go with a blank slate, because what's economically viable across the street is probably different than what we think it is. I don't know, but I wouldn't want to try to dictate that because we have no idea about real estate investment and development, at least I don't. So I'd rather leave a blank slate, look at the RFPs and see what comes back, and if what comes back is 24 apartments, and that's the only thing that can work, and we get 3 proposals, and they all say all we can do is housing, it's not allowed, for one thing, by zoning, but I would want to see that and make a decision versus trying to be prescriptive in what we expect developers to do there. Rather than tying their hands, I'd rather say, you tell us what will work, and we'll tell you if that's acceptable or not, right? Because we ultimately have the decision on what people propose. So if we don't like the proposals, we can always say, we're not moving forward with the project, no matter what it is. Versus if we do that up front, we might eliminate people that would have otherwise had good ideas that we didn't even think of.
Any thoughts, Maureen?
Well, I'd have to agree with Brett on that. I'd want a blank slate. And if they're gonna make an investment like that, I don't think they'd make any money in just residential buildings. And I think it's more palatable with a mixed-use part of it so that they can do retail or commercial and housing also. I think that'd be a more viable project for a developer.
Yeah, and I think we've all, and the RFP committee and the working group that, you know, had the discussions, everybody agrees what we expect there is a mixed-use building.
Right.
So I would expect that that's what people will propose, because that's the model that everyone's been talking about and agrees with, and the reason everybody talks about it and agrees with it, because it makes sense in terms of urban planning and also development and real estate investment. So, yeah, I'm confident that that's what would end up coming
Yeah,
back.
I mean, like I said, my only concern is we don't want to go backwards from where we are now, and we don't want to, be too lopsided as far as what we see constructed. That's.
I agree. I just don't think we should do that up. I don't think we should be prescriptive up front. I agree with you, but let's look at what comes back and make a decision based on what comes back.
Right. I think we all agree with that, but
Yeah.
I'm with you, I wouldn't want to make it prescriptive.
Yeah, right, because I mean, we could sit here till we're blue in the face having a philosophical debate about what the right mix is of commercial versus residential, but
Right.
we have no idea what might come back.
And I think
I would think the layout of the building is going to dictate it to some point. If your first floor is in theory going to be, retail, and you only have 2 floors, we should have a rough idea. We don't have to be contractors to guess, but we should be able to guess fairly close. But regardless, we'll see where that brings us.
I do think Brett made a good point in that we don't have to accept any of these responses. So I will personally be very disappointed if we put all this work in and we don't find a successful respondent. But that's an important thing for everybody to remember, is if everything that comes back, we don't like anything, we can say nope, and we can issue it again, or we take the feedback and say, "Look, we heard from 3 respondents, and all 3 of them said, this is the only thing that's going to work," and we'll go back to the town and say, this is what we heard.
Yeah.
Do we want to
not
make the
do anything,
change,
or do you want to try again?
Right.
Right.
Right, and it's a real possibility. Timing-wise, whatever, it may take more than one issue of the RFP to actually get a successful bidder. We don't know that.
Right.
And that's where I'm hopeful that we get a number of people that show up for the site visit presentation, where we will walk them through the visioning process and make it understood. And this is still working, so I didn't bring a copy for everybody, but our first thing on our comparative evaluation criteria is adherence to the established vision and overall development concept will be 25% of their score. And the next heaviest category is 15%, which is, are they financially solvent? So you got to adhere to this design standards in the vision to really have a chance at being successful on this.
And you said on the scoring criteria, you have how many questions? Was it 9?
We have
9 different categories?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8.
8. Okay.
So establish adherence to the vision, relevant experience with similar projects. So you've done mixed-use development before. Their financials, the qualifications of the team. So who's going to be the actual project manager and the CEO of the company and stuff. The creation of diverse housing, preservation or adaptive reuse of the church. And we said either in its entirety or just elements of it. Because we heard that strong, you know, people would like to see the church, even if it's just the facade saved for them. There's safety, legal, and termination record. Obviously, we want to pick somebody who's safe and doesn't get fired from jobs. And then the interview is the last piece of it for those to make it through. But those are all weighted differently. The first one is 25%, the next two are 15%, and then 10% for the next ones, and then 5% for the safety, legal, and that, so. And a number of these, like the financials, the team history, the safety, legal records, that's standard across, you know, all RFPs. I think we would all feel really bad if we picked a very unsafe firm for next door, and that came out that we picked somebody who's got all kinds of OSHA violations and stuff, so.
Right, right. And then I think from the legal side of it, the other thing, because I had often thought the same thing, which is if you do accept a bid and we do convey the property, how do you actually ensure that the project is going to get built and get built in a timely fashion?
Yep.
You know, you'd hate to convey the properties. Let's just say, you know, we get our money, we've got $350,000 or $400,000 invested, we get our money back, we convey out the properties, and it just lays idle, something happens, the contractor's busy, they move on to another project, you know, what happens? You know, what control do we have over it? So, you know, we do have a lot of loose ends that we really have to kind of understand the best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, and kind of talk through some of those, trying to understand.
It's an interesting project in that we're running this from the town side, but once the board conveys those properties, this is a private development. It's outside of our hands as much as we all want ownership.
Developer and
all
the
that.
planning board,
Yeah,
right? So it sits with the planning board. So that again
Right.
comes back to the
Right.
governance of these rules.
Right.
but it's
That's
different.
the only control that we have.
They'll
Once we
control
convey
the
the properties, that's the only control we have.
Right, right. Which, you know, essentially, that's, other than code enforcement, that is really how it works to this day.
Totally.
With other
Absolutely.
projects all over town.
Yeah.
wherever they may
I mean,
be.
that's the way it's designed, right? It's,
Right, right.
that's why we've got a great planning board.
That's right, that's right. There's a question, is it about the actual RFP, the issuance of the RFP?
It's common to what we're discussing.
Okay, yeah.
I'm actually going to come up next to you, Dave. because
Sure.
I'm on the spot. Michelle Antonelli, 148 South Street. I just want to call to the board's mind and to Dave's mind a couple of points that were previously discussed. One of them is that you get what you zone for. And I know you were present when that statement was made. And I think we need to realize that this is really a prescriptive zoning process, right? We're trying to encourage multi or mixed use. So if we don't prescribe some of what that looks like, we're not going to get what we want. We're going to get sort of what makes the most sense for the developer. One of the things that Dodson Flinker said very early on is that retail use in this town is not going to bring high dollar amounts in, that we need to plan for services and plan for businesses in this downtown area that are going to serve the local community. So basically, by offering a multi-use or mixed-use process, we're offering opportunities for developers to make money on the residential side at the cost or potential cost of losing some money or not being as profitable in those local services. So I think we need to be very careful about saying, well, we'll get what comes in. Because it is a weighted process, I really do think we could set some numbers in. And if nobody responds and everybody takes zeros on that section, we've gotten the information that we're looking for. Is this a viable task? But we've also focused to these developers what we're really looking for. When you just say mixed use, and that means I can put in 90% apartments or housing and so forth, and affordable housing is very important. I'm not dismissing that at all. But in the end, we end up with one attorney's office. That's not what we're trying to look for. That is not services for the local community. That is not mixed use. So I would just strongly advocate that we have something in this process even if it's not necessarily weighted, but really the strong advocacy, because really what we're looking for, if we're talking about the first floor street side being commercial retail type of space, we're really talking about 30%, because you're not going to build a building like an ice cream cone if the upper floors are going to be residential. So, I mean, that's kind of what we're looking for, is it not? So why are we trying to encourage people to respond with things that are not what we're looking for? I just really think we can't let go of what mixed use means. It doesn't mean give us as little of what we want for a retail or commercial space so that you can make as much money as you can. I think it's really focusing on having developers that don't normally like to build mixed use. That's another thing that the EDC and the RFP committee have been aware of, is that builders like to build residences or they like to build commercial. They don't tend to mix the two, which is why this is sort of a new thing that we're doing and being prescriptive about what it looks like. So I would just strongly, strongly advocate that we don't just let mixed use be defined by any of the developers, because we don't want to necessarily go through 2 or 3 processes. But if this first process, everybody comes back with an apartment building and one small attorney's office, you know, we're sort of letting that happen. Like, that's, I just think it's important that we go back to what we learned from the consultant, which is that retail space and commercial space in this town is not going to bring in large amounts of income, that it was going to, from the very beginning, the consultant said, it's going to require public-private partnership. Well, I feel like the public has given a lot of money already into this project, and now it's time for the private partnership to step up and be their piece of that, which is you need to give us some retail and some services that are going to service the local community, but also, which is the hope of the EDC and the hope of everybody here, that we do become more of a destination place and not just, you know, a local community serving with small local spaces. So I just wanted to add that piece.
Yeah, I think ultimately, we have to digest all this, and obviously, given the timeline where this is going to be presented, I believe it was on our February 4th meeting, we really need to have this as a discussion topic at our next meeting on the 21st, to really decide as a board. There's a couple of questions, again, that were put forward, so we need to kind of digest those and weigh in as far as, you know, what we think about that. You know, do we want to put in any sort of a minimum bid towards the properties? That was a question that was put to the board. So we need to kind of talk about that, not at this point. We'll have a discussion item for that at our next meeting and decide what we'd like to do. You know, do we want to include a minimum offer for the properties that the town currently owns? That's one question. And then the other thing we need to talk about, again, at our next meeting, would be, is that something, would we be willing to sign a purchase and sale? That certainly would make conveying our property with the other property much more of a streamlined process. But again, it's something that we should discuss on a, I would think, on a regular discussion item at our next meeting. Do you have anything else to add, or any other questions? Or after I ask you, my colleagues, that I will then ask you, David, if you have anything else you'd like to present to us. But do you have any other questions or comments? Nothing else? No. Nothing else? David, is there anything else that you wanted to touch upon?
No, I mean, the only other thing is, you know, I would say we have a wonderful group of people working on this. I know we say that about all of our boards and our volunteers, but I think the majority of this committee are first-time volunteers. And attendance at our meetings, we have a 7-member board with an alternate. We always have like 6 or 7 people there. So it's been, and we meet every other week. So it's been a heavy time commitment, and it's been great that we've had a lot of new people involved in this process. And we'd like to hear feedback, like Michelle gave great feedback there, and I'll take that back to our meeting on Monday. So
good.
It's been really good.
It's good to hear.
So
it's good. That's all, you know, ultimately what I think we're all striving to improve is participation.
Yeah.
And certainly new faces, you know, younger generation of people coming forward, which is nice to see. So, all right, we have our homework that we have to get prepared for our next meeting. Good work.
Really good.
I guess that's all we have for now. Thank you.
Yes?
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks to the rest of the team. It's great stuff.
I'll move all the way back here.
All right. So that concludes 3.0. On to discussion items. We have a motion to approve various appointments. We have an applicant for the Community Center Steering Committee. I don't think I see the gentleman here.
I did not invite him.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I thought that you all knew him.
Yes.
So I apologize.
Well, I do anyways. He's actually a lifelong resident of town, so it's good to see Mr. David Kennedy. He is stepping forward and would like to serve on the Library Steering Committee, or it's actually
Community
Library
Center.
Council on Aging,
Yeah.
or also known as the Community Center. But in any event, my colleagues, you have the application in front of us. He is also a member of the VFW, so we were looking for that as per our last discussion.
Yep.
So is there anything else, any questions anybody may have? Otherwise, I will take a motion.
I would move that we appoint David Kennedy to the Library Senior Steering Committee.
I second that.
Can I make that unanimous action? Thank you, David, for stepping forward. All right, discussion item 4.2, discussion and vote on the closure of Warren Street. This one, I thought we had a brief agenda. We got more. So, in any event, we have been discussing this. We have an email, there's some new information. As far as it's not really much of an issue now with the school buses traveling over the street. It's now really a question of timing and what needs to be done as far as notifying the community. The DPW has offered to hand deliver some letters to the neighbors and explain to them what's going on. So it's a matter of, again, my concern really was snow operations, sanding operations. So, I would like to maybe kick it out a little bit further, maybe the end of March. I don't know what your thoughts are. Just trying to get us past the snow season, make it as easy on our DPW personnel as we can. And if I can just add one thing before you ask that question. There's, we discussed it's Jersey barriers, so there would be two sets of Jersey barriers. There would be Jersey barriers at the very end of the parking lot here, probably just north of the dumpsters. And then if you went up the road further, there would be some more Jersey barriers installed coming down Warren Street, right at the end of where Nelson Street cuts in. So it would actually be a section of the road that wouldn't be used there. So it would be two different closures. So, having said that, any discussion?
What does Dennis take on snow and ice? I didn't specifically ask him.
We talked about the snow and ice at our meeting with Dennis Westgate, DPW director, and both the fire chief and police chief to kind of go over a plan of attack to close Warren Street down. And we talked about the snow and ice issue, and Dennis, so right now, just so folks understand, they plow from the top of Warren downward, and they plow to both corners of the lot. So with the handicap lot, as they push the snow onto the banking, and then they push a pile of snow in the corner of this lot where we just cut in the new handicap ramp. So we had that conversation that both areas are no longer going to be able to use, whether we close Warren Street or not, given the handicapped accessibility needs. So Dennis recognized that, and he had said that they can make provisions that they would push the snow towards the right upper hand corner of the lot, towards the wooded area.
Probably between the dumpster and the wooded area? Right. Is that what he's thinking?
And then he could come down Warren Street and basically put it at or over the Jersey barriers, I would think.
Come down Warren Street would be closed.
Right, but how would he come from the top? How would he plow what's open up there?
The space between the Jersey barriers?
Not that, the space
Coming down
Between
Up the hill from
Nelson,
Nelson Street.
In
between
School.
Nelson Street and School Street, that section, I think, is what Brett's referring to.
So he would just come down and go
Right.
around the back of the
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
DPW?
Right.
Or around the back of the
Yeah,
town
you come
hall?
down Warren Street, then
Yeah, that's
hook
what
a
I
right
was-
onto Nelson.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
okay, that was my question.
Sorry.
So he's fine with it, and the police and fire chiefs are,
Yeah, both are in strong support. The only request by the fire chief was that we continue, especially as we start to entertain businesses, potential businesses here in the town center, that we always keep in mind that Church Street should only allow parking on one side of Church Street. So just, again, he wanted to be clear, we don't allow parking on both sides of Church Street now, but, you know, given some of the proposed businesses, he wants to be clear that he needs that space open, because he has large apparatus, if there was an emergency, and there was parking allowed on both sides of Church Street, he would not be able to get fire apparatus down that road.
okay.
So he just wanted folks to be aware of that.
Yeah. So we may need to put up additional signs or have the PD enforce it a little bit, and if there's ever any issue.
Right. And Chief Bradley confirmed that there's only parking allowed, I think, on the side of the church right now.
Anyway. Those are my questions, thank you.
Would we be able to get a bid out now, say, and be ready by the end of March so that we could start the project?
For construction, so I was going to talk a little bit about that in my town manager report. So we've had a lot of problems with sewer overflows here in Town Hall. I would say we've had close to a dozen in the past year or so. And Kelly has been really working with a plumbing contractor to try to identify the cause of those overflows backing up into the building. And we have cameraed it multiple occasions, and it's clear, it's clean. So we did meet with Dennis and his team regarding this issue, and Kelly has since talked to the OPM, that was the OPM for the renovation of this building, and we're thinking that there may be an issue with the connection that leads outside of the building to the sewer main. The sewer main is over 60 years old, it's a clay sewer main. So at this point, we're gonna hold off on putting anything out to bid until we can solve
That problem?
that problem. And the reason being is, we may have to replace that sewer main. Again, it's a clay sewer pipe, so it should be replaced at some point anyways. But we don't wanna reconstruct a parking lot and then have to cut it in a year from now, realizing that it was the sewer main. So we're gonna take 2 steps back on the construction of the parking lot until we can solve the sewer backup problem.
And the sewer exits over to Warren Street, that's where it
right.
picks up, not on 140.
There's a lateral that comes outside of the building and picks up on Warren Street.
Those, unfortunately, those dates don't coincide.
Nope.
I mean, I'm a fan of closing Warren Street as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm a
Because
fan of
we've
closing
been,
it.
we've been trying to do it for years, especially given that there may be a delay in the construction there, which I think makes sense. You know, from a safety perspective, I just think it makes a lot of sense. And I think if we had any concerns and issues, we would have heard about them. There may be a resident or two that, you know, doesn't like the change. I think that will always be the case, no matter, you know, whether we do it now or in 6 months, that's not going to change. And we've got to try it. So if we're trying it, doesn't make, you know, there's no reason to wait to try it. We might as well try it as soon as possible and get some information sooner rather than later.
I would agree with that.
What do you think is a reasonable amount of time to notify the public, signboards, letters? The plan is to deliver, which I think is a good idea, to deliver some letters to the residents. What do you think that lead time should look like? Does that look like to you 6 weeks, 2 months, a week? What do you think it should be?
I mean, I think we're not asking for permission, right? So I think we notify them and
That we will be
that
closing.
we're going to close it
on
on
such and
effective
such a
such and
date.
such a date based on when we can put up the Jersey barriers. If we can put up the Jersey barriers, and I think we give people a week to sort of realize they're going to have to drive a little different, and then you put up the Jersey barriers. I don't think like, it's not a public process per se, right? I don't think we want to say, hey, we're going to wait 8 weeks, we're going to have public comment, we're going to have public hearings, like we've gone through
Nope.
over the past 20 years, that's all.
No, I
happened.
think it's just a procedural matter
Yeah.
at this point.
So a
the
couple weeks.
I was gonna say, so the procedural matter is, again, the Jersey barriers themselves,
Yeah.
the letters, signboards, so,
Yeah,
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
yeah.
so we're at, there's a couple, does that make it February 7th?
I don't know, what's 2 weeks from today?
2 weeks from today, what's today? It'll be the 21st, yeah.
So, I mean,
Do you think
whatever
Dennis
the
can-
Friday is of that week?
Dennis has Jersey barriers already in place over at the DPW yard, so putting Jersey barriers there, I think, is simple. And then he has already volunteered to deploy his manpower to notify all the residents with paper notification as well. He did want me to bring up that, and he wanted your approval, that we only have 2 light boards, and as you recall, during the summer, between Triple E, road construction projects, we were really moving light boards all over the community to try to notify folks what was going on. And so he was recommending that we use Chapter 90 funds to purchase a 3rd light board. He said probably about $2,500 using Chapter 90 funds. And then he'd want to use this as part of the public messaging. Maybe not this one per se, but certainly the other 2, and we would have this 3rd one as a backup if something else were to come in. He thinks that we should put a light board out front here, so folks know that once you enter this now parking lot, that this is only one way in, one way out. You can't, it's not a through street any longer.
Particularly if there's trucks or delivery trucks or...
Right. So I wanted to put a light board right out front, just so it's very clear, and then advertise another light board at the top of the hill as well. So folks understand, especially at night, they're coming down the hill, they realize that the street's now closed.
And he's got Chapter 90 funding to do that.
He does,
He needs it.
right. So again, he has 2 light boards right now, but again, he wants to use those both for this project, and the 3rd one would help, it would not only help us immediately, but it would certainly help us throughout the summer months during our construction season.
Well, I'm thinking of Hopkinton Road and that whole, there's going to be a lot of road work, and then the TIP project coming up 140, so...
The warrant is open too, so we could actually put it on just put it on a warrant article. If you want,
We could put it on a warrant article for $2,500, or he could just use Chapter 90 funds, which is already in an account existing. But he wanted, again, it's Chapter 90 funds, and this is an approved purchase using Chapter 90 funds, but he wanted to get our approval before he went ahead and did that.
I mean,
I would say Chapter 90 funds, at least you have it right away when we start this project.
we get 2 different topics coming up. I think we should kind of finish up the actual time and date of what we want to do with the road before we discuss.
good point.
Maybe we should,
Chairman.
again, we might as well just put this on a separate discussion item, I guess. If we're going to vote to change the appropriation of money, I think we should probably put that on a separate discussion item
I
myself.
mean, I think it's his money to spend, so I don't know if it's an
It
appropriation.
doesn't change the appropriation because it's allowed under the Chapter 90
Right.
funds that he
He
is
technically
allowed.
doesn't have to ask us,
Correct,
so I think that was more of a courtesy.
yeah.
Well, I disagree, but it's up to you, folks. I mean, I feel like Chapter 90 money is road money. We're buying a signboard, that's not road money.
If
Chapter 90
Chapter
money is
can
governed
be
by the state.
sidewalks or that's a safety thing
Yeah.
for the roadways.
But still, curbing, sidewalks, guardrails are a totally different thing than a message board.
It's determined by the state what we can use Chapter
Yeah.
90 money for, right?
Yeah,
And
it's one
this
of
is
the
an allowed
uses.
It's
use.
an allowable use of the funds.
We don't make those rules, right? The state makes them.
Yeah.
So if it's allowed within those rules, then, I mean, that's what the money's for. So, I don't, but your point,
Yeah, I think the point is, we need to select
can he,
a time and a date
right?
for the road.
Yeah, we do.
So why don't we finish that, and then we can, maybe, we
So-
can pick that up right away, or we can
Yeah.
discuss it under the manager's report. We can talk about the message board.
Yeah.
So what did we decide, the Friday after the 21st? The 21st is our meeting, that Friday?
Yeah.
Which
The
would be
21st
like
is
The
the
next
next
25th would be the,
The
Friday.
24th would be that Friday, the 24th.
24th.
Yep.
You
Go
don't
with the
want to say
24th.
March 4th, March 1st for easy math? Nobody likes that date. Let's
No.
just
This
see.
is a January date.
Let's see, we are at,
This isn't for the selectmen meeting, this is to close the road down.
Right. So we're scheduled, you want to say the Friday after January? Or did you
No.
say the
Saying-
Friday
Friday
after
after-
February?
it would
Saying
be
January
It would be
24th.
January 24th.
And that way you're started on a weekend.
Yep.
January 24th.
It's a Friday.
I personally, I think it's way too soon, but again, I'll,
Yeah, I mean, I defer to the experts on stuff like this, the fire chief, the police chief, the DPW director, because it doesn't matter to me when we close the road.
And it gives them time to get used to it before they start construction and everything.
Right. If we close it in the spring and we find out there's a snow and ice management problem next year, then we've had it closed for 9 months and we've got to reopen it. So you could look at it that way too. We don't know what we don't know, so, right? It's easy to take the Jersey barriers down. We can always take the Jersey barriers out if Dennis goes, oh man, I didn't think this was going to happen. I mean, we control the Jersey barriers. It's just Dennis going and picking them up. You can do it in an hour.
Make it a
as
little
long as you
easier.
think the 2 weeks is good public notice, then let's,
It's fine.
let's put this to rest.
People on that
Somebody
street
wanna make
have
a
known.
motion?
Yeah. I make a motion that we close Warren Street on January 24th.
Now, second?
All right, make that unanimous action. Now, why don't we pick up that under the manager's report? Let's just try to finish up these discussion items here real quick. We'll go to manager's report and we can talk about the sign. All right. So we are at discussion item 4.3, renew a Class 2 application. I need to recuse myself for this, but there was an application, I think, that did not get processed. So I will step away. Brett, if you could take care of this.
Sure.
Be great.
Yep.
I won't go back.
Nope.
I just- yeah.
Do you have the name, Sandy?
Next stop, yes, I'm sorry.
It's all right. I just don't have it in front of me.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you have any questions? We've seen it before. So I make a motion that we issue the Class 2 license to Next Stop Automotive LLC.
I'll second.
Majority action.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, at your leisure,
The birthday boy.
the birthday man. I should have brought you a hat.
Definitely.
You would have made me wear it.
Definitely not necessary. All right. Discussion item 4.4, accept the resignation and advertise vacant committee positions. So we have a committee resignation. This is Debbie Amarelli has tendered her resignation for the Fire and EMS Advisory Committee and also the Upton Cultural Council. Now, she is going to remain on as the library trustee. She'll remain on as a Recreation Commission and also the Community Center Steering Committee. So, again, she's got a very busy schedule. We thank her for her service to the town, but she needs to resign from these two committees. So,
I would make a motion that we accept the resignation of Deborah Amarelli from the Fire and EMS Advisory and the Cultural Council.
I would second that, only adding that we thank her, as you did, for her service and commitment to the town. She does a lot for the community, so we're very grateful for that.
yep, and make that unanimous action. She was here earlier.
She was here,
I
she
showed
had
her.
to depart.
She left?
Okay, yeah. All right.
And then do we need to do anything to open those new vacancies, or once they're vacant, we automatically can post them?
Once they're vacant, I'll just update their
Just advertise
spreadsheet
it.
and put it on the website to advertise.
Great.
And actually, while we're on that topic, she had, Deb Amarelli had asked about the Fire and EMS Advisory Committee, because that has pretty much, hasn't met in probably well over a year, I believe. So we may want to put that as a look-ahead topic and kind of decide if we want to give that committee a charge. And there was also a question that was brought forward to the board over 6 months ago, I think, regarding if they could have an ad hoc member who could serve in a capacity but was not president of town. So I'm not sure, that's a couple of different issues that we have with that committee, what I think we need to
Yeah, okay.
decide.
Yeah, I would definitely,
Yeah.
we should put that on an agenda, because I think that's worth discussing.
Right.
Rather than just letting it languish out there.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it'd be good to put that as a look ahead, and then we can maybe pick it up. We'll see when we're busy with budget presentations, and maybe just after that, we can take a look at the committee and see how that may work.
Yep.
Okay. And let's see, discussion item 4.5, approve a contract disclosure under Mass General Law, Chapter 268A, Section 20, Paragraph D.
And that would be me.
Please.
I'll answer questions.
All right. Okay, so folks, this is in regard to our colleague Maureen Dwinell. She's, of course, a selectman, but prior to being a selectman, she is a contractor for the town under snow plowing operations. So she has filled out the disclosure forms. It is a single form, 5-page long. So Brett, I will turn it over to you. Do you have any questions for Maureen?
Just for the public, if you want to just describe what's happening.
Well, this is for snow plowing, and we've had we had one truck, we've got 2 trucks on the road this year, and we've been plowing for the town for the last 7 years. And this didn't get changed, it should have been changed over back in 2016 after my husband died, because the checks came in his name. And I was not on any board or anything at the time. And it didn't we finished the year out in his name, but it didn't get changed the following year, so I changed it.
Okay. And it's currently, again, it's under the business name of the farm? It's under the name of the farm?
It would be under my name, under Stone Harbor Farm LLC.
Stone Harbor Farm LLC. Okay. And as you mentioned, 2 trucks on for the town right now?
2 trucks.
2 trucks, okay.
And that arrangement's been in place well preceding any service you've had to the town and before you.
December of 2012.
There you go. So I make a motion that we accept the disclosure form submitted by Select Member Dwinell.
Make that majority action.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those wrong for me.
All right. Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, we're on to Article 5.0, recognition. Does anybody have any recognition? No recognition? All right. Seeing none, on to town manager's report. Derek, what do you have for us?
Just a few updates. As you know, you probably have received or noticed that there's potholes out there, and that typically happens in the winter time period with the frost and the snow and the heaves and the ice and things of that nature. So DPW director wants everyone to know that bear with us. When the time is right, and they're doing it now, they're out there trying to patch as many potholes as possible. So if you see a pothole, give us a call here at Town Hall, call the DPW directly, we'll take care of it as soon as possible. But we do have our hot box out there, and they're trying to work as fast as they can now that the weather has given us some time. So that's the first item. The Kids at Play registration is now open. They've been registering for the past few weeks now, and they're actually ahead of registrations this year as compared to last year. At the same time, because of that, we've already started a hiring process or the advertisement for our seasonal positions. Although it's January, we're already thinking about what's going to happen here in June. Chief Bradley has been working with the Recreation Commission on the Youth Recreation Night, which takes place at BVT. The first evening that happened was this past Saturday. It's going to take place for the next 3 Saturdays here in January, and that's from 6 to 9 p.m. This past Saturday, we had over 200 kids attended this recreation night, so well attended. And staying on the police department of 2 officers that I have mentioned in the past that are going to be starting on January 20th. Both of these individuals are graduating this week from the police academy in Worcester. Both individuals are currently military police officers for the Army National Guard. One of these individuals, she is the class leader for the Military Police Academy, so we know, again, two top-notch candidates coming to serve the town of Upton. And then, as I had mentioned in the past, we have identified a wastewater operator who will begin his service next Monday, January 13th. I spoke to Janice Nowicki today, our COA director. She brought to my attention that the Tri-Valley group has identified the Tri-Valley Volunteer of the Year. His name is Richard Provost. He is one of our COA members, so he received the Tri-Valley Volunteer of the Year. So I don't think that's happened in the town of Upton for quite some time, that they identify a local person. So I wanted to mention Mr. Provost's name, because I think that's a great accomplishment for him to be identified for that award. And then lastly, there are a number of bids that are out there. So, and we talked a lot about these, but like I had mentioned in the past, that we typically try to issue our RFPs and our bids during the winter months in preparation for construction season in the spring. 6 Main Street, so as you recall, I had issued a bid for 6 Main Street. The bid came back in mid-October for approximately $75,000. I've since ordered an asbestos survey and was hoping that that number would come down on its own. It had not come down on its own based upon the asbestos survey. So I am reissuing the 6 Main Street demolition bid, and we'll do a bid opening on February 5th. So I know we were hoping to see that building come down this January, but I think if we are a little bit more patient, we can probably save some tax dollars. As the committee has been working on, the feasibility committee has issued the RFP for the owner's project manager for the potential community center. The bids are due, or the responses are due on January 21st. I'm also hoping that on January 21st, we will have enough candidates that we can have the election for our building committee. As you remember, once the building committee is appointed, their first task will be to review the responses and then to select an OPM to start that process. That process is going to take at least 9 months. The lower walkway at Kiwanis Beach, we issued a bid on that as well. We plan to have a bid opening on January 20th. As you recall from our last meeting, I mentioned that the recreation director received notice that we received a $15,000 grant award from the Mass Office on Disability. We're going to use that $15,000 to reconstruct a walkway at Kiwanis Beach, again hoping to get a few different responses for the reconstruction project. And then lastly, Dennis Westgate, DPW Director, has issued the bid for the Fowler Street Bridge reconstruction project. As you recall, that's going to reconstruct that bridge. It's going to make that wider, and it's also going to run water down Fowler Street, and it's going to be capped with a fire hydrant, providing fire protection to that neighborhood, which they don't have right now. That bid opening is scheduled for January 30th. So again, a lot happening in the bid world. We have 3 more bids that have to be issued. I talked a little bit about the parking lot already. We have to work on that one. And working with Dave's team on issuing that one as well. So still some more work in the procurement world. And then if you'd like to talk about the signboard, I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay. So you had mentioned that the signboard is allowable under using Chapter 90 funds?
It's an allowable use of the funds, yes.
It is, okay. All right. Should the board make a motion to appropriate that money, or just to basically give our blessing?
Yeah, I think he'd prefer best. I mean, it's, once the town receives the money, you know, it's under the DPW's direction and authority, but, you know, given this type of acquisition, he wanted it to be known that he wanted to use Chapter 90 funds for this purpose. So he's really looking for your blessing to make sure that you're okay with it.
Okay. And again, this will be for a third message board to basically to notify the community of any safety or upcoming events or anything of that nature.
Right.
Gotcha. All right.
Thank you.
You good with that? Everybody good with that?
Yeah. Do we need a motion? We're good?
Yep, no motions necessary.
Just one comment, if I may. So it strikes me as we hear these updates each meeting, the amount of grant money that's being brought into this town. And the reason I bring that up is I know that for the past couple of years, I've gotten a lot of feedback and recommendations from various citizens in town and from the community about the number of grants that exist and are out there. So I just hope that this is recognized as progress for the town in taking advantage of a lot of these grant programs that are out there, and that, you know, community feedback makes a difference. The team in the town hall working together, all the folks in these departments and commissions and groups are all working together to go after this money, and it's really making a difference. So some really great things are happening with regards to the grants, and that's partly because of your leadership and the department head leadership. So thank you. It's great.
I appreciated that, and you know, I didn't announce it formally because we rebid the 6 Main Street demolition project, but since you brought up grants, I have talked to the Attorney General's office, and we did talk about this at town meeting. Town meeting appropriated $195,000 to acquire 6 Main Street and then to demolish the structure based upon the bids that we received, knowing that we were at least going to be competitive with some Attorney General's support. And unofficially, assuming we get a good bid result back, we will receive an additional $25,000 to subsidize the demolition of that project as well through the Attorney General's office, through that grant. So I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you brought up grants, I thought I'd mention it.
Very good.
Another great example. So, thank you.
Yeah. Very good. All right. And no questions? So we'll go forward. Anybody have any new business? No new business? All right. We'll get to topics. We talked about that earlier. Is there any public comment? Public comment?
Just a quick comment.
Mr. McGuire?
It's Rick McGuire. I just want to emphasize the point on the grants. We've been talking about going after grants for the last 3 years, and it's starting to happen, and that's a great thing. But I really think we should put out, maybe quarterly, just some statement or late public relations release saying, we have acquired these grants and this is what it's going for. Maybe a quarterly note, because they're starting to roll in. We need to make people aware of it. And it's not happening. So it's a good thing. It's a chance to take the victory lap and get the news out there that we're starting to win these grants. I mean, even the fire department just won something for the turnout equipment. We need to publicize that. I think you did get it in the paper, by the way. But something like that, we should proactively promote it, because it's goodness. And it takes a lot of effort to go get it, and that's recognizing the people who put the effort into it.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure what would be the best way to address that.
I don't know what the best way is, but we need to do something.
Yeah.
So
It's on our webpage. Usually, when I check into the Town of Upton webpage, I usually do see it on there, or the Twitter feed, but, you know, of course, there's probably more ways to announce it, so I'm not sure what would work best.
So typically, for the larger grants, we do a press release. We did a joint press release with Rep. Meridian's office a couple of weeks ago for the turnout gear, and we try to, not only post it on our website, but push it out through our social media. So that's the most common way we do it, through press releases. And thank you for bringing that up, Rick. One thing I did want to do this year, and working on it right now, hoping to deliver the FY21 budget recommendation next week. In my budget transmittal, I did plan to have a section to talk about the grants, in the aggregate, how much we received in grant dollars this past year.
It's really important. I think that's an important message to the citizens of the town, because that's been a change in the culture here.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Is there any other public comment?
Yes, put it in the tax bills. It takes the sting out of things when we see how hard people are working to keep those tax bills as low as they can be.
It's a good idea. It's a great idea.
All right. Public comment? Yes.
On the website, we have an update that says the grants are. We update that, what grants that we're getting.
Yeah, no, I saw it on the news page just recently. I think it was the one regarding the turnout gear. So.
No, we have a section that's just grants.
Are you referring to the Excel spreadsheet?
No.
Cultural
on-
Council?
On the website.
Cultural
Yes.
Council?
No,
Oh.
this is just, on the website itself, there's a section that, of the grants that have been awarded to the town. We just update that.
So it's a tab that says
It's a
grants?
tab.
Okay,
On the Board
with
of
a drop-down
Selectmen page.
menu or something of that nature?
It's the Excel spreadsheet.
Okay. All right. That's something we'll have to work on in the coming weeks. Figure out what may be better ways to get that information out to the people. Either populate it on the website or, again, the various ideas that were mentioned. So, all right. Any other questions or comments? All set? All right. I will take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Make that unanimous action.